Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You're here because, like us, you believe that sport is a vehicle for elevating global consciousness. But you know that elevating global consciousness through sport only matters if it actually helps you to compete in a peak performance state, get in the zone, and compete at your highest level. We created this show to highlight the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors to unveil for you a side of sports that most never see and rarely know exists. Okay, so today's guest is literally on a mission to raise consciousness and end suffering for as many people as he possibly can through energy psychology. He's got a resume that is stacked with accolades, groundbreaking research, and accomplishments like being an award-winning author, health writer, PhD, researcher, speaker, and entrepreneur, the founder of one of the largest alternative medicine sites on the web, and the editor of the peer-reviewed professional journal, Energy Psychology, Theory, Research, and Treatment. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He founded the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare to study and implement promising evidence-based psychological and medical techniques. He's a member of Jack Canfield's Transformational Leadership Council, a writer for the Huffington Post, the science columnist for Unity Magazine, has testified before Congress twice, and is the founder of the Veterans Stress Project, which has treated over 20,000 veterans suffering from PTSD to date through free or low-cost sessions using energy psychology. And what might be most incredible part of this story is the fact that he's accomplished much, if not all, of this work in just the last 12 years. After having lived 45 years of his life by trying to stay as small as he could, the last 15 have been lived large, and through his infectious desire to help others break free of the emotions, belief systems, and trauma holding them back from realizing their potential, he has practically willed the entire energy psychology community to get on his back as he charges headfirst into the entrenched medical dogma with hard, peer-reviewed science. It's my pleasure to introduce to Omni Athlete, the author of the best-selling book, The Genie in Your Genes, Dawson Church. Welcome to the show, Dawson. Okay, as coaches, we can lean into the idea, and even athletes, that we are living in a field, right? And that these fields they're around us at every different moment. And that as we become more aware of our ability to affect them, those effects will take place in our three-dimensional reality. But how do we put ourselves in a state that allows us to affect them?
That is such a good question. And so, yes, there are fields, and some of those fields are very, very small scale, other fields very large scale. An example of a small scale field is the field that surrounds an individual cell. And biologists can actually tell the health of a cell by the nature of its field, and especially biophotons. These are little photonic particles, light particles that cells emit. Very particular frequency, very faint trail of biophotons. But a cell that's healthy emits biophotons at a different rate from an unhealthy cell. And those are tiny fields. Then there are, of course, fields the size of an organism. Then there are fields the size of a whole community. There are fields the size of a whole planet. There are fields the size of a whole solar system. And geologists are actually mapping some of these field effects between the Earth, other planets in our solar system, other stars, and so on. So there are all these fields in which we interact. And so what we can do in terms of personal activity and personal choice is to align ourselves with certain frequencies. And one example is the frequency of love, the frequency of connection, the frequency of goodwill. And I'll tell you a kind of a little bit of an awkward personal story about this. It doesn't reflect all that well on me personally, but it's a big learning experience for me. And that is, I've been married for many years. I'm married to a totally wonderful being of light and love and sweetness. And we're incredibly different. I mean, we're just as unlike as chalk and cheese in so many ways. And one of those ways is that she is a naturally happy person. She doesn't have to be told to be happy. She doesn't have to listen to an inspiring audio tape to make her happy. She doesn't have to read a great inspirational book to make her happy. She is pretty much happy all the time. Not always. I mean, she has her up days and her down days, but her whole disposition is fundamentally happy. And she approaches life this way. She talks to people that way. And that's just her disposition. I, on the other hand, am not that way naturally. I've been retraining myself for many, many years to be happy, but I was so unhappy when I was a kid. I was never diagnosed with anything, but looking back, I now look at who I was, and I read some of my old journals when I was 15 years old, and I was clinically depressed and had clinical levels of PTSD, very high levels of PTSD. And so I have struggled my whole life with being a negative thinker, critical, judgmental, blaming, all the usual negative self-talk and stuff going on in my mind. And I'm not in that field of happiness at all, but I can put myself there. I deliberately do it every morning. I wake up in the morning, I feel all these negative thoughts crowding in. I often have, all my dreams are full of struggle and death and dismemberment and problems and all of these negative scenarios. And then I wake up in the morning, I feel terrible. I feel anxious about the day ahead. I feel worried. I feel depressed. My mind zooms in to think about the negative stuff going on. And I have to align myself with the field. Now, when I align myself with a happy field, all of that starts to change. So I leave meditation half an hour or an hour later, and I feel fantastic. I am a genuinely happy person at that point. I've shifted my alignment with the field. And so there are these global fields. And the most interesting way, there are lots of interesting ways that's studied in science, but one of the ones I find fascinating is a phenomenon called emotional contagion. And these researchers, starting in the 1970s, have found that emotions are as contagious as bugs, disease, germs. And the field got going when one of the key researchers, a researcher called Sigal Barsad, worked in an office and noticed that there was one person in that office. Whenever that person came in, it was like the whole emotional tone of the room went down. When that person left, the whole emotional tone of the room went up. My wife and I were at a community meeting a week ago, and there were a bunch of people in the room. There were the leaders who were leading the meeting, and this couple walked in. They were very well dressed. They looked very affluent. They were driving a nice late model Mercedes, cost like $85,000. And they walked in, and they began to talk, and they immediately, the whole emotional energy of the room began to get worse. And the more they actually were interrupting the speaker, and they had all kinds of negative things to say about the topic, and the whole emotional energy became paranoid and fearful. The whole room changed. And then at a certain point, after about an hour, I was actually thinking of just leaving, because I just felt so uncomfortable there. Didn't feel like my energy environment. So I was passing my wife little notes, hey, it's time to leave. And then this couple said, oh, we have to go to another meeting, and they left. And the whole emotional energy in the room lightened up. And so there are these invisible energies that, while they're invisible, they're real, and emotional contagion spreads. And according to another long-running study, this study's been running since like 1965, I think. It's the Framingham Heart Study. And it's been studying this town called Framingham, Massachusetts now for over 60 years. And that's when he found that emotional contagion spreads in that kind of field effect. And so that if your neighbor is happy, you're about 30% more likely to be happy. And if you're happier, people around you are happier as well. So happiness is contagious, 3 levels out. What I feel so good about is that bad emotions, negative emotions are also contagious, but only about 2 levels out. So ultimately, happy people have more of an effect in the outside world than unhappy people. So there are these fields, and we can align ourselves with them. So when you align yourself, when you sit in meditation, and you imagine that you're one person there in this space aligning with those fields, but then there are millions of people meditating and aligning with them as well. Now suddenly you aren't this little local being. You are a non-local being, an elevated mind, an elevated physiological function, an elevated perspective. And you start to live your life in the external way very differently because of those internal changes. And so what we can do, the practical thing we can do every day is maybe you're unhappy. Maybe things aren't going well in your life. Maybe your marriage isn't really good, or your kids are acting up, or your parents drive you crazy, or people in your team aren't cooperating, or all kinds of, we all have challenges in our lives. But whatever they might be, if you deliberately take that step in consciousness and say, I am going to align with the most noble, with the most elevated, with the most centered parts of myself that there are. And you literally shift the address you occupy in consciousness. You say, I don't belong in that horrible place, that horrible part of town that my mind wants to go to. I'm going to drag my mind to this wonderful part of town and make that my new address. Do that often enough, and I found that doing that for me year after year after year after year starts to shift me. In my new book, Mind to Matter, I have a case history which I shared briefly last time of an astrophysicist who did an 8-week mindfulness program, and in 8 weeks, the emotional regulation part of his brain, it's called the dentate gyrus, that part of his brain in 8 weeks of mindfulness grew. The brain tissue volume in that dentate gyrus, that part of his brain, grew by 22.8%. So now it's not just a state of mind. It's not just an emotional space you're bringing yourself into. It's not just software of saying, okay, I'm going to process these thoughts differently, and I'm going to move to this new address. Now it's brain hardware. You've actually got different neurons firing inside your brain. Those pathways are becoming stronger and more active, and those brain regions are growing. Now you have more hardware to support the change. So you can literally shift yourself over time from being that negative, depressed, anxious person I was when I was 15 years old to being a, at least with after an hour meditation every morning, a pretty happy guy.
What's so interesting is what comes to mind for me is and I would love to hear what you think about this. It seems like in the athletic environment especially, but I know this is true, I think, for people in general, we associate positivity with a detachment from what reality is. And what often happens, I think, in the context of athletics is we as a coach, I'm going to feel a little maybe fearful to preach positivity because I feel like I'm just telling my players to ignore something, or as an athlete, the same feeling. But what it seems like to me is there's a separation between positivity and aligning yourself with the frequency of love, and really that connection, not trying to ignore the reality, but just aligning with a different kind of vibration.
Yeah, and we've all had the experience of somebody who seems nice, and yet their words have a really negative slant to them. We've also been familiar with people who are loving and kind, and yet they're able to tell us difficult truths. And so it's less what you say than the emotional space which you're coming. So I always align myself first. In our team, we have difficult things. We have things that don't work out. We did a big promotion last year, about a year ago. And it was so funny. We had this free product that we created. It was just a really fun little product. And then we had another product that people had to pay for at the end of it. And we launched it, and it just went gangbusters. People absolutely loved our little simple free product. It was a 21-day tapping immersion challenge we offered. People loved it. We had a huge number of downloads, wildly enthusiastic Facebook comments. And then when we offered them the paid product, nobody bought it. It was a total flop. And so we had to then analyze this for the team. It's like, hey, wow, what happened? We had this really amazing paid product at the end of the free one, and the free one we had much better than expected uptake on, and then total flop on the paid product. So you have to sit there and think about this. Gina, we're going to talk about this. And I remember at one team meeting, 1 month, we lost a lot of money in our organization, and one of our team members was absolutely distraught. She was saying, Dawson, how can you sit there being so positive when the whole business is going down the tubes? We've lost all this money. You're having trouble making payroll, blah, 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 blah. How can you be this inspirational figure when here in our own company? And so what I see happening in an interaction like that is the limbic brain, the middle brain, the emotional brain is all fired up there. And then that is going to give this negative slant to whatever is discussed. But if you can learn to master your limbic system, especially tapping, meditation are great. Tapping does this, meditation does this. Then you are not sucked into that kind of dynamic, and you can remain detached. Now, you aren't. It's not like you're an unfeeling person. You feel, you certainly sympathize with people's pain and your own pain, but you are the being above those emotions, and you aren't sucked into them, drawn into them, as it's very easy to do. And in a team environment, you do need that coach who can tell you, hey, that you got to work on your backhand. You're doing great at free throws, but you're not passing the ball. You're not passing the ball. You're not setting up the player that needs to carry it forward. Whatever it might be, you need to have those conversations. Do it from love, though, and it's possible to do that. In a marriage as well, you have real problems. In a family, you have to address certain things. But again, if you do it from love, then you have this energy there that allows even the bad stuff to be dealt with. And just think about really big disasters. I mean, we have disasters in the world. We have natural disasters, human-caused disasters, and we have to have a response to those. The person who is able to maintain that space of clarity, mental clarity, and not have the limbic brain firing, not have the emotional brain sucked in and saying, like, there's just a classic example. There's a fire in the theater, and some people rush for the exits and they're screaming, we're going to die. And then somebody else is there who doesn't have that response, who's mastered their emotional brain, who stays in their prefrontal cortex, and who says, okay, look where the fire extinguishers are. Let's go use them. Look, there are some kids here that need help getting out. There's some old people. Let's make sure that we assist them. So the people running around in circles screaming, we're all going to die, are not able to help, whereas the person who has mastery then, who's built that resilient hardware in his or her brain, that's the person who has a real contribution to make to a team or to society.
So this is a perfect segue, because I think, we have yet to really talk about tapping truly and specifically. And I think, what does tapping and the systems that it is activating and orchestrating or reorganizing, what does that have to do with mastering our emotional brain?
It's fascinating to see what tapping does in the brain. And now we have quite a number of studies using EEG or MRI, which is showing this to us. And essentially, the classic work done in the 1950s and 60s showed that we have these three brains. And again, this is an oversimplification, but we have our ancient reptile brain, we have our mammalian emotional brain. On top of that, we have this huge mass of tissue up here called the prefrontal cortex. And so we have our modern primate brain up top here. So again, reptile brain in the back, handling, the reptile brain, I'm not saying that in any kind of pejorative way, because it handles digestion and reproduction and circulation and movement. It handles all these things incredibly well. And it does them all below the threshold of our consciousness. I was reading a study recently that showed that just the optical system is processing about 6 million pieces of information coming in from the eyes every second in our reptile brain. So it does an amazing job of scanning the horizon for threats, making sure we jump back up on the curb if we jaywalk and are almost being hit by a car. It does all these things that help keep us safe. And that's in the back of our brain over here. Then above that, we have this middle layer of the limbic system with the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, all these other structures in it. And that's the emotional brain and the learning brain. Mammals can learn and feel in a way in which reptiles can't, because they have all this tissue over there. About that, we have the primate brain. And you want to be thinking from that primate brain. You want to be having that primate brain that is playing a deciding role in what you do. And so what happens is that we get signals from our senses, and those signals are then interpreted by our emotional brain and our primate brain. And what's supposed to happen is what some neuroscientists call the long path. And the long path is that we get a signal from our environment, and we get that signal coming into our brains, and then our emotional brain and our memory and learning part of our brain is supposed to refer that signal to the thinking part, the prefrontal cortex. And so an example that I've used before is a young soldier who fought in Iraq in 2004. And one of the things that we worked with him on with tapping was whenever he'd hear the sound of a plastic water bottle being crunched, he'd dive for cover. It sounded to him like small arms fire, and he had PTSD, and so he was triggered by the sound of the water bottle whenever there's a water bottle being crunched. And so what is supposed to happen is that he's supposed to get that signal in the emotional brain. It's supposed to be referred up to the prefrontal cortex, and then the prefrontal cortex is supposed to give the emotional brain the feedback that that's not small arms fire, that's a water bottle. The emotional brain then does not trigger the inner reptile brain to send us into fight or flight. So that's the long pop. That's where we're supposed to go from here, our senses, to the emotional brain, the learning memory part of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to make the decision that that is not a threat to our survival, and then tell that to the emotional brain, which then stops right there, does not send a signal down through our bodies and activate our whole autonomic nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So that's the long path. But in people who are traumatized, what happens is they hear the water bottle and they dive for cover. And now, literally, their brains rewire themselves. And no longer is there the long path going from the middle part of the brain up to the prefrontal cortex, making the decision, the executive functions making the decision, and then back to the middle brain, which then does or doesn't refer it back to the reptilian brain. Instead, it goes straight from hearing that sensory input to putting us into fight or flight, and it skips the prefrontal cortex. And so the prefrontal cortex in people with depression and high anxiety and PTSD, some of those brain regions actually start to shrink. They atrophy. They aren't being used. And the parts of the brain that handle stress, like the amygdala, start to grow, get bigger, because they're being used all the time. So now, again, our software of mind is becoming our hardware of brain, and we change. And so in EFT studies, what we show is that when you tap on these acupressure points, and there are 12 of them we use in the long form of EFT, there are 8 of them we use in the short form of EFT, but when you tap on those points, it just shuts down the triggered emotional midbrain. So this person is in an MRI scanner. And in one recent study, it was to do with food. It was a food craving study. So these obese women, they were laying in an MRI, and they were thinking about the foods they crave, and their whole emotional brain lit up. Then they learned tapping. And now they were tapping either while they were in the scanner, or they were desensitizing themselves before the scanner, and then thinking about their craved food. And when they began to tap, that emotional midbrain just shut off like that. In other neuroimaging studies at Harvard University, 3 of them to be precise, over the last 15 years, very interesting, brilliant work there, showed that acupuncture just shuts off the fear response in the midbrain. So we now know that these somatic signals to do with touch are able to tell our emotional brain that we're safe. So here I'm thinking about the food that triggers me, or I'm thinking about the bomb blasts in Iraq, and so these things are going on in my memory. And so now I'm doing that, and that's sending a signal to my emotional brain to get aroused, and then sending a signal to my reptile brain to go into fight or flight. This memory is driving the process, or this experience, or this craved food is driving the process. Then I tap. So now I'm tapping on these acupuncture points, and they're totally real. I mean, you can measure them. There are devices that can show you where they are. Tap on these acupressure points, and then what happens is really interesting. That signal now comes to the emotional brain that you're getting physical stimulation. It's like having a friend put their arm around your shoulder when you're feeling bad. Now you're getting this comforting signal, and it's not a mental signal. It's not an intellectual signal saying, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't feel upset. There's really nothing to be upset about, because the emotional midbrain has no language. Language is in the prefrontal cortex. And so you can talk to the emotional midbrain all you want. It will have absolutely no effect. You don't need to work at the level of the body and somatic experiences. And so when you tap, it shuts down that emotional reaction because the brain is now getting two signals, one from the memory saying, bad things are happening, go to fight or flight. Then it's getting this somatic signal from the body saying, everything's okay. And the tapping feels soothing, and now you can calm down. When it feels that reassurance, it calms down. It's like stroking a dog or stroking a cat. You know, the dog's barking like crazy, and the master says to the dog, now Fido, don't bark, quit barking. And Fido just keeps on barking. But if the master strokes the dog, then that's a somatic signal of calmness that calms the dog down. That's why I humorously I do lots of live workshops every year, which I teach. I call EFT stroking your inner dog.
It's so powerful. You know, Dawson, what I was thinking about there is so this is maybe the next level up in terms of understanding our bodies, but I think a lot of listeners and viewers will find this really valuable, right? The electromagnetic current that runs through our body, right? And in those fields that we were talking about earlier, what came to mind for me in conversations that I've had recently is we do a lot of, and I say we from an athletic standpoint, so the community of sports really has over the last 10 to 15 years stressed mental training, right? And it's stressed this focus on, okay, mind, train the mind, train the mind, train the mind. And what came to mind in a couple conversations is the notion that training the mind may be great, but if we have these trapped emotional traumas and pains stored in our body that we are not releasing, it does us no good to train the mind because the performance, the physiological performance won't be there.
That's right. Yeah, mind training and trying to control your life with the mind is a very limited approach. I think what's much better is having both a mental approach and a physical approach, somatic approach. That's why all these new therapies, EMDR uses eye movements or bilateral stimulation or tapping to calm people down. EFT uses tapping on acupuncture points and also uses some eye movements as well. Somatic experiencing uses shaking to shake out tension from your body. What they all have in common is they are approaching it from the point of view of the body. And so just mental training, you have to have a very strong mind to do that. And there are people who could do that. I just so admire those people who have so much mental toughness and grit. They can make a decision and stick with it. For the most of us, doesn't work. One of my favorite quotes is from a coach called Derek Silva, and he said, if information were all we needed, then we would all be millionaires with perfect abs. And information just doesn't land for most people. Instead, obesity rates have gone up and overweight rates have gone up from 65% a decade ago, which was a huge number, to 71% recently in the last survey. And so people try to control their lives with their mind. They just can't do it. You have to work at the level of the body. You have to release those stuck emotions. Now, when you release those stuck emotions, then all the mental training you've done, you have a chance to put it into practice because you're no longer being hijacked by your emotions. A famous brain researcher called Lawrence Ledoux at the University of Chicago, amazing brain researcher, he calls it the hostile takeover of consciousness by emotion. When I'm angry, when I'm frustrated, when I'm at the end of my tether, I will yell and scream and just act out and do totally counterproductive things driven by emotion that rationally I would never do. I would never normally say that to my child or to my boss or to my spouse or people in my world. But when I'm angry or upset, I will do. People do incredibly counterproductive things when they're under the influence of emotion, when their consciousness has been hijacked by emotion. So part of this is taking back control. You have emotions, you feel emotions still, but basically your prefrontal cortex is in control and your limbic brain has been calmed down.
So then as we think about pain, and this comes up because we've talked with a couple of different former professional athletes who have really focused their career, post-career for them, on helping other athletes transition, right? And whether it's from college into whatever it is beyond college athletics that somebody's going to go to, or a professional level transitioning out of their sport, there's a lot of challenge with the pain that comes through that transition, literally like the physiological pain. And I've heard you multiple times in different interviews and in your books reference the fact that EFT shouldn't be necessarily thought of as a tool to treat physical pain. However, what tends to happen is so much of our physical pain is truly emotional pain that we're not truly aware of. And I found that absolutely fascinating.
One of the funny things that has occurred over the last many years as I've been doing live workshops is in many of my earlier live workshops, I would ask for somebody to step forward and I would work them in front of the room. Somebody who had a purely physical pain. I said, I want somebody who there's no emotional component to this pain. It's a purely physical pain. And so I would have these people walk up to the front of the room. I'd talk to them, I'd assess them, and if I believe it was truly physical pain, then I would work with them. And what we found time after time was that we uncovered emotions that were part of that pain. One of the very first people I ever worked with when I was doing a live lecture was a guy who walked into the lecture and he was on crutches. And he'd had a car crash 2 weeks before. He'd broken his leg, upper leg. His femur is the long bone in your thigh. And his pain was an 8 out of 10. And when I asked for volunteers, this guy raised his hand. He was on his crutches and raised one hand. He really wanted to work with me. And I thought, there's no way I want to work. I don't want to work with this guy because he had a car crash 2 weeks ago. His pain's an 8 out of 10. It's a purely physical pain. I don't think there's anything there to work with emotions with EFT. So I'm going to just not call on him as a volunteer. But I worked with somebody else and another person, a third person, a fourth person. And then eventually this guy was still raising his hand, wanting me to work with him. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll work with the guy. So he hobbled up front in his crutches. And I had him tell the story of the car crash. And he talked about how he'd been driving his car with his wife that particular evening, and they'd been just out of the blue sideswiped by another car and broken his leg. So, it seemed like a pretty mechanical injury, But then I began to ask questions, and I said, well, where were you going? And he said, oh, we were going to this event, and my wife really wanted to go to this event, and I didn't want to go at all, and she made me drive. There's an emotion over there. So he's resentful about his wife making him do something he didn't want to do. Now, has his wife ever before in their 22-year marriage made him do something he didn't want to do? Probably. And is mad about that. Has anyone ever made him do anything? Did his high school coach make him do something he didn't want to do? Did his second grade teacher, did his parents, did his older brother, did his cousin at summer camp make him do things he didn't want to do? Sure. He has a whole track record of that in his life. So he did EFT on a number of those events. And then he was angry. He had emotion around. I said, well, tell me, how's the healing process going? And said, well, gee, I'm really afraid. What if my bone doesn't heal? What if I have this it's called a non-union fracture? Bones don't always knit together. What if I have a non-union fracture? Oh, fear there. What if the pain gets worse? What if the pain never goes away? So emotion after emotion after emotion came up. And eventually I said to him after the session, I said, okay, so on a scale of 0 to 10, what is your pain right now? And he said, it's a 2. So we went from 8 to a 2. So the 2 is the actual physical pain 2 weeks after the fracture and the injury. The other 6 points that he walked in with are the resentment, the fear, all of the other emotional aspects. And in research, every research study we've done on EFT, and there are quite a few of them, all show about a 2/3 drop in pain when we tap on the emotions. So it is powerful to do that.
So the emotions, in some ways, I've heard emotions referred to as a bridge for us, right? That they tend to be a really, if understood and aware of, they tend to be a beautiful tool. They can point us in the directions of belief systems, of challenges that we're facing that are really constructs that we've created more so than objective realities that we're dealing with. What comes to mind there is this notion that if we are not aware of our emotions in terms of recovery, especially as athletes, we probably are impeding our body's ability to do what it is naturally programmed to do.
Yes, you have to be aware of your body, your emotions. And if you are suppressing them, if you're denying them, if you are not in touch with them, if you have a history of denial, if you're afraid of them and so you don't want to feel them, all of these things are are often the case. And people with strong emotions, especially, often are really afraid of them. I remember working with one guy who it was in a workshop of mine, and he was in France many years back, and he was really kind of the class clown. He was a very happy guy. He was always smiling and laughing, making jokes. People liked him. He was very gregarious, but he was very fat. And so he wanted to do a session with me in front of the class. And so I called him up, and I just tuned into his energy. And I realized that there was a lot of emotion behind the smiling, jolly guy that he appeared to be. And I said to him, "Are you angry?" And he said, "Oui, yes." And he turned out to be very, very angry and very afraid of his emotions. And his weight, 100 or more pounds overweight, was like the cork in the bottle. That kept him from killing people. He was afraid he was going to murder somebody with all the murderous raging inside of him. So he kept a smile on his face and 100 pounds on his body, and that kind of pacified him enough to where he wasn't a threat. But people men especially, I find, are afraid of their emotions. Sometimes a few times in classes, I've been acting out a big emotion as part of a demonstration. I scream and yell in a live class to show activation of the limbic system. And I notice people, they're all like quaking over there. Even though I'm acting and I'm telling them I'm acting, they're still having this big reaction, because that's what happens in our limbic system when we see somebody screaming, yelling, and having this big emotion. So we are emotional beings. We're affecting each other emotionally all the time. And many of us are very ambivalent about our emotions. And so EFT is a safe way to process all those emotions, let them out, let them move. And we look at them, and they move through us very quickly. Maybe you still feel angry sometimes, and frustrated and annoyed, and whatever it might be, but it passes really quickly because you aren't having to, stuff it with a big body, or with overeating, or with drinking, or with drugs, or with pornography, or all kinds of ways people have of not dealing with their feelings. You feel your feelings, you feel your body. It's amazing, Josh, how cut off from their bodies many people are. And athletes, I think, are more in touch with their bodies. They have this wonderful thing called somatic intelligence. I was interviewing some members of the Tennessee Titans football team a few years back, and these guys did not have a lot of intellectual smarts, but wow, they could start out standing, and in 2 seconds they'd be running 45 miles an hour, and then they could jump 4 feet in the air. I mean, these guys had somebody and catch a football. I mean, you see these guys playing football, you have no idea how hard that is, what they're doing. They make it look easy because they have somatic intelligence like we do. They're geniuses in this way. And so athletes have a lot more of it than the average person. And it's wonderful if the athlete can be aware of their feelings as well, and really in touch with their bodies, and then having this full life mentally, emotionally, and physically, and then having tools to deal with those difficult emotions that inevitably come up for all of us.
Yeah, and the ability to communicate with the fields, right? That we are part of it. Just to bring it full circle, this is incredible, Dawson. Before I ask my final question, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
The best place right now is through the website for my new book, Mind to Matter, and that website is mindtomatter.club, C-L-U-B, mindtomatter.club, and there you can do a number of things. You can pre-order the book. It's not out yet, but you can pre-order the book at mindtomatter.club, and you can also get a schedule of my live events. So I'm doing a bunch of book signings, different parts of the country. I'd love to meet people. I just love doing book signings, meeting people person to person, face to face, and I'm giving talks on the subject of mind to matter and the amazing ways our mind does affect external reality. And so mindtomatter.club has that schedule. And mindtomatter.club also has links where you can find other things that we're doing and we're offering. So that's the best website right now, is the book's website, mindtomatter.club.
Awesome. Okay, so for our final question, Dawson, this show is called Omni Athlete, and we created this show to really understand what it takes to be the ultimate mind, body, and spirit competitor. So my question is, what does being an Omni Athlete mean to you?
I think it is being fit in all areas of your life. And in some areas of our lives, we're naturally fit. Um, I have a friend who's an investment banker, and he's just super fit in financial terms. He effortlessly deals in the realm of money. I have another friend who's a writer, and she is just absolutely brilliant, just handles that part of her life in a remarkable way, has had, I think, 3 New York Times best-selling books. I have another friend who's just an amazing parent, just an incredible parent. But the woman who's a parent really struggles with her spiritual life. The man who's a money master really struggles with his health. The woman who is a writer has one of the most terrible marriages that you can imagine, and just a drain on her energy, drain on her self-esteem, drain on her whole life. And so all of us have areas of our lives where we excel and areas of our lives we really struggle with. And so being fit as possible in all of them. If you do well at one of those areas, strive for mastery. Strive to be even better. Masters are always looking at what they can do to attain even greater mastery. They love being masters, and they love looking for greater mastery. But the areas of your life where you do struggle, and all of us have them, just tune yourself up in that way as well. Let go of your negative self-talk. I'll use another personal example for me. I run 2 weight loss programs, and 8 years ago, I lost 50 pounds. Now, it was really an interesting journey to lose 50 pounds, and I did that only after I delved into all the science behind weight loss. And I found that most of the advice I'd got about weight loss before was all wrong, but the science is very simple. There are 7 things you can do, and if you do those things, it's highly likely you will lose weight and will never gain it back. So you got to know the science behind it. So I learned that stuff. So you find those areas where you're weak, where you aren't doing well, and then I created some weight loss programs where I share that with everybody else. So you find your areas where you struggle, and I've been on diets, and I've been done every kind of diet there was, and I had to lose weight, then I regained the weight again later on. So I finally figured out how to lose that 50 pounds and keep it off for now 8 years. And so you learn these things. So you find those areas where you don't excel, you then work on strengthening those and being fit there. So look at how you can be as fit as possible in all these life areas. Will you be a genius at all of them? No. But you can be pretty good at all of them and keep your life in reasonable balance so that when difficult times come, when you lose your job, when you have a hard time in your marriage, when you're having a health challenge, you're a resilient person. You built that gray matter and that white matter and those neural connections that make you strong. And you're not just mentally strong, your brain is resilient. You've built those neural connections, and you then are able to deal with what life throws you. So that's really the thing, I think, to emphasize about being an Omni athlete is be fit in all areas of your life and respect and love the fact that you're doing the best you can and seek to improve continually.
It puts fitness into a completely different terminology, right? This is incredible, Dawson. Thank you for being on the show. And guys, if you have not read The Genie in Your Genes, go get it right now. And if you haven't registered for Dawson's new book, go do it right now. Like the level of science and the level of research that Dawson and his team have put together around what happens in our bodies when it comes to the emotional connection we have, the fields that we are in. Like there's no point in denying it. What we have to choose is to step into it and understand how, as athletes and coaches, that impacts our performance and how much of this reality we are truly creating. Like this is the work that Dawson has literally devoted his life to over the last 12 years. Go really dive as deep as you possibly can into his world and understand that when we talk about somatic awareness, this isn't just some esoteric concept. It's true connection to our body and to the field and to what our brain is receiving and to everything that we are creating from a moment-to-moment basis. You will not be disappointed, and I guarantee your brains will blow up in the best way possible and that you will be a better athlete because of it. So until next time, guys. What is up, Omni Athletes? Thank you guys for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. If this content is adding value to your lives, guys, please like and share and subscribe in every way you can. Share our content. That helps us grow this community, which is really ultimately what we are after right now. So please like, comment, share, tell your friends about what we're doing. If it's adding value, please share it. And if it's not, tell us so we can really improve this content and make sure it's something that you guys want and want to see. Coming up, guys, in July, I'm super excited to announce we have the 2018 Sports, Energy, and Consciousness Festival. It's going to be in San Rafael, California. This is an absolutely incredible event for a lot of reasons. The main one being you get to actually engage with so many of the people that we've had on the show, so many of the leaders in sports, energy, and consciousness. The speakers are absolutely incredible, and the community is even more incredible. So I cannot encourage you guys enough. Get to this festival. It is going to be an experience that transforms your vision of athletics, your ability to achieve peak performance, to find flow, to awaken an expanded level of consciousness in your performance that you just cannot find anywhere else. It's truly the tip of the iceberg, and you guys want to be part of it. July 13th through 15th in San Rafael, California. Go to sportsenergyfestival.com to get your tickets today before they run out. It's going to go quick, guys. Get there. sportsenergyfestival.com, July 13th through 15th. We'll see you there.